When Isaac Stevens came into the area, and he was sent here not only as the commissioner, but in 1853 he came here to do a survey of a possible railroad going through the area. Um, the he specifically left James Dottie here with the Blackfeet because my understanding is that they knew the Blackfeet to be very protective of their area and wanted to establish a relationship with the Blackfeet, and so left James Dottie here to work on that relationship. So he travels over across the mountains, he being Isaac I. Stevenson. He negotiates treaties along the way and then comes back to the Blackfeet. What you have is a large group of native people, whether it be Piikani, Kainai, or Siksika. You even had the tribes from across the mountains here too, that were here for the negotiations of the 1855 treaty. Why I say that it wasn't necessarily a peace treaty, to some extent it was. They wanted to establish peace with the Flathead tribe, or the Flathead Nation, or and the Nez Perce Nation, but it was more or less to gain access to land so that railroad could go through. And so, to me, I look at it as more of a cession of land to the United States government for the purposes of establishing a railroad. When that treaty took place, it was interestingly that we had a gentleman, an older gentleman from the tribe just this last year when we were looking at doing the 1855 treaty as far as a symposium, that we was talking about how this treaty has affected the Blackfeet. And one of the interesting stories that took place was how the warriors back then rode the middle, and they have a Blackfoot term for it, and I don't know what it is, but they rode the middle, they called it, and they protected the middle. In other words, they were trying to keep people from coming into Blackfeet territory from the Missouri north, trying to keep them out because they've seen the encroachment in the southern part of their territory. And so they would ride that, and as comrades they would try and protect the middle, they called it. And that was a story that he shared with us this last winter, which I thought was real interesting because I thought, we get mistaken as being warlike and vicious and all this, but actually they're protectors. They're protectors of their people, their families, their band, their tribe. They're protecting their hunting ground, which is their survival. The changes that took place with the 1855 treaty became very dramatic. I always tell the students that it was a pivotal change point for the Blackfeet in the way that they've always carried on their business. Now, the Blackfeet have to deal with an agent, okay? And in that treaty, it's saying that the government is going to give X amount of dollars for 10-year period or whatever, and it's to be used for. And at first, they were pretty liberal, and it didn't spell it all out, but there was the guidelines there that it would be used for education, it would be used for the agency, it would be used for agricultural implements, and really pushing toward getting the Indians, the Blackfeet, to be agriculturalists in a sense. And that just, that I ask the students, is that real? Is that a reality that the Blackfeet could actually understand? And a lot of them say no. It was just words, words on paper. Were we protected? No, we weren't. We see an encroachment of non-Indians in the southern part of the Blackfoot territory, where they discovered minerals in the hills and just a matter of a short period of time, there's a flood of miners that come in, and all of a sudden here's something of value to the United States, and they're going to need access to that land. So, Blackfeet were pushed further north into their territory. After the miners came, there were the cattlemen that came, and they saw these lush, rolling hills of grass. And once again, were the Blackfeet protected against the encroachment of them? No, they weren't. Here come hundreds and thousands of cattle into the Blackfeet territory, and they're not paying leases, they're not buying land, they're just running on this property. It's been a continuum. There was oil and gas discovered on the Blackfeet land, and once again we go into negotiations. And before we negotiated in 1855. Then came the executive orders, and just a wisp of the pen, Blackfeet lost thousands of acres. And then it was restored, maybe because of a guilty conscience, I'm not sure, and then with the whisk of the pen, it's gone again. Here we are in 1.5 million acres, and if you were to look at a property map, so much of it is owned by non-Indian, is owned by tribal members, is owned by members. It's it's a checkerboard of colors there. And a lot of Blackfeet think, we need to hang on to what we have, because land is this area, our land, helps us make up who we are as Blackfeet.